Image-based sexual abuse, previously known as revenge porn or non-consensual pornography, is a form of online harassment involving the non-consensual sharing of intimate images or videos. It's unfortunately become a pervasive public health issue in today's digital age. While this harmful practice affects individuals of all genders and backgrounds, research has shown that Black women are disproportionately targeted. The intersectionality of race and gender makes Black women more vulnerable to exploitation and abuses. Specifically, the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes of a Black woman's sexuality via this form of abuse can lead to increased stigma and victim blaming. Additionally, the lack of legal protections and resources make it difficult for Black women to seek justice and support. One of the most effective ways to address these issues is through education and advocacy. Toward this end, today's episode features Dr. Mikiba W. Morehead, a senior consultant with TNG LLC and an expert on this topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Mikiba Morehead, for agreeing to give some of your time today to talk about a really important issue that's really prevalent, but it's something that I think we don't talk a lot about as Black women. Of course, I appreciate you offline. We said I can call you Mikiba, but we want to acknowledge that you have training and expertise in this topic. So good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to be with you.
Well, let's just dive right in. And I know when I spoke with you, I originally referred to it as revenge porn. And I know the names have changed from revenge porn to non-consensual porn to image-based violence. Maybe you could start off by discussing or sharing with us what are all these name changes about, and also describing exactly what it means when we're thinking about this concept.
So the name change of moving from the concept of revenge porn to non-consensual pornography to what we're using currently, which is image-based sexual abuse, is really kind of outlining the transition and the transformation in our understanding about what this type of gender-based abuse really is. When this was starting to emerge kind of in the early 2000s, a lot of individuals were sharing intimate or sexualized or nude images of individuals without their consent. And the idea was that the reason behind that sharing was for vengeance, for revenge, because that perpetrator had been wronged in some way and was using this method of imagery to enact their revenge. But we know from research that the reason that folks share this type of imagery isn't always for the purpose of revenge. Sometimes it's to boost their own social capital, to show how attractive the person that they may be engaging with is. Sometimes they do it as currency to trade individuals to kind of perpetuate this type of harm. Sometimes there are folks that are doing it without malicious intent. So moving from that concept of revenge porn to the non-consensuality of the sharing of that digital image, and now to our understanding that really it's a tool that folks use as a form of gender-based violence and gender-based oppression.
Can you give us some insights in the ways in which this form of violence links into the larger narrative of defining gender-based violence?
Yeah, so gender-based violence are acts of physical or sexual violence that are often targeted based on someone's sex or gender characteristics. So we have that same framework, but that it's happening within an online environment or through the use of our communication technologies, the internet, or emerging new media. So often when we're talking about technology-facilitated sexual abuse, you've got those characteristics that the victims or the targets of the behavior are often being targeted because of their sex or gender characteristics. And we often see those victims being women or femme-presenting or female-identified. We often see the behavior being sexual in nature, either forms of sexual violence or other forms of sex or gender-based abuse. And so we see the overlap of technology as the tool by which that perpetrator enacts that form of sexual violence. Here we often see the types of violence being the misuse of images, of either images that were originally provided within the context of a relationship, an interpersonal relationship or romantic relationship. And we can see folks who are gaining those without consent, meaning that a person might have hacked into someone's private account or scammed an individual to be able to get access to that nude, sexualized imagery, either the still imagery or video imagery, and then misusing it as a way to gain or maintain power and control over that target or victim, or as a way to victimize, to perpetrate harm, to oppress an individual, or to discriminate against them in some way. So the underlying connections are the connection to an individual's sex or gender characteristics, and this idea of discrimination, oppression, and the application of power and control.
And then I'm also thinking, like you talked about, is that it could happen at one time, but because it's sitting there on the internet, this re-victimization can happen over and over. So a perpetrator can enact this violence once, but it continues. Can you talk about the impact of the re-victimization over the long term?
Yes. So image-based sexual abuse is very specific in that way because of the longer-term impact of victimization. Because of the permanence of the internet and how easy it is for imagery specifically, but also information to be disseminated, reproduced, to kind of be resurrected and then distributed again, it means that victims in this space have longer term impacts of that victimization. And we see it being very similar to the impacts of folks who experience offline sexual violence and intimate partner violence, meaning that when someone becomes aware that their intimate photos or videos have been shared without their consent, or that someone has produced a pornographic deepfake that's now circulating, we see the onset of the same types of negative health consequences that we see from victims of offline sexual abuse and sexual violence. So we see increases of mental health issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and self-harming behaviors, increased substance abuse, be that alcohol or other drugs. We see folks experiencing lots of somatic or physical symptoms like aches and pain, GI and stomach bowel issues, fatigue, sleeplessness, and inability to concentrate or focus. Within the collegiate environment specifically, we also see folks experiencing negative academic outcomes, meaning that we see increased absenteeism from classes or work. We see a withdrawal from their participation in groups, their clubs or organizations, and we see increased rates of dropout. But what's significant here is that anytime there's the possibility that imagery could resurface, we see the same intensity of the onset of those negative consequences. And think about the number of times that an individual has a potential change in their life. This could be that you're applying for a job. If you're a student, that you're applying for a scholarship or graduate school, that you're engaging in a new relationship and you want to learn about that person. So anytime there's something new, an introduction that happens, or a request for something, folks who have been victims in this space have the onset of that anxiety and fear of, is this imagery going to resurface? Is this another person who's going to see this? Another time that I'm going to have to explain it and deal with it. And each of those onsets, we see again the rise of that same intensity of those negative health consequences.
How prevalent is this phenomenon? Is it something that's occurring often, or is it just really sort of in pockets of certain age groups or certain types of people?
When we're talking about image-based sexual abuse, we're usually talking about two main types: the non-consensual sharing of intimate imagery, that could be still pictures or sexual videos. And we're also seeing an emergence of deep fakes, where you have the digital manipulation either of audio or visual recordings of imagery. And in this context, we're often seeing it being sexualized or pornographic in nature. So because we're talking about two forms of image-based sharing, we often see the prevalence focused on individuals that are from marginalized groups and marginalized populations. That means that targets are often women or femme-presenting individuals. They're individuals of color, meaning traditionally black or brown individuals. And we see folks from our LGBTQ plus community being targeted. So when you start to overlap that and see who are the folks that have a higher likelihood of being targeted or being victims of image-based abuse, you can see that specifically women of color and women of color who may also be part of the LGBTQ plus community stepping forward. In addition to that, we see folks who are in the emerging adult category. So those are individuals who are kind of in that 18 to 25-year-old age group. That means that folks within that age group with those specific sex and gender characteristics have that higher likelihood and have higher risk factors of victimization.
No, I think it's so powerful that you brought up the age factor, because I think about it. I'm 50 now. And back in the days, if you had to take a picture, it had to be sent to someone to print it off.
Yes.
And then if there was something that was sexualized, they either didn't print it or they put this big sticker on it.
Yeah, because we see technology being used as a tool for distribution and for manufacturing, we see that the implications really are the permanence that's connected to the internet. It is really hard to get information removed from the internet once it's there. And although there are ways that social media platforms and other technological companies are starting to think about how to suppress information or to scrub it as much as possible, the advancement of our technology has made it much easier to capture that imagery, to maintain that footprint, and then to circulate it again in other forms. And sometimes those forms are intentionally created for this type of gendered oppression and the overlap of gendered racism when we see it applied to specifically Black women.
The race piece I want to really dive into, but are the perpetrators typically always men?
So since we are talking about forms of gender-based abuse, we do see some connection in image-based abuse and the other forms of traditional sex and gender-based abuse that happens in offline environments, where more often than not that perpetrator is male or male identified. But technology is also a great equalizer of power. And so we're seeing a lot more perpetrators being women or female identified individuals as well. And some of that technology and the power balance means it's very easy for folks to perpetuate this type of abuse and harm. You don't need to be strong or big. You can occupy spaces where you can be safe or even mask who you are. And you don't necessarily need to be very sophisticated or educated in the technology to be able to use it or really misuse it in this particular way. Now that we are looking back at some of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of those that we're seeing is that during that time period where so much of our life was moved to the online environment, during that time, we saw the profile of perpetrators in this space shift a little bit, and women being highlighted as perpetrators in this space. Sometimes those individuals are targeting other women, and sometimes those individuals are targeting men or male identified individuals.
So are the reasons for the perpetration when it's a woman or a man, are they the same?
Yeah, some of the rationale behind it can be the same. So we see some of those reasons, again, being retribution, because someone has felt wronged or scorned in their relationship, even those relationships that can be same-sex relationships as a way to get back, or that revenge element. We see that sharing as a commodity, where someone is looking to boost their own social status or their own social profile by engaging in this trading behavior. Sometimes we see it as the perpetuation of sexual objectification of that female body or that female figure. So there is really some assumptions that we're making based on how new the rise of this particular phenomenon is, and the lack of research, both in the area of kind of the mindset of perpetrators, specifically female identified perpetrators in this space, and how that might apply to the impacts when you have a female on female type of offense.
So switching to the other side of looking at this, what about victimization? Does the victimization look the same when it's a female victim versus a male victim?
So we do see some differences. And again, with technology being the great power balancer, we see that female perpetrators are increasingly targeting males or male identified victims in this space. So there's a conversation that's happening now around another form of technology facilitated sexual abuse, which is sexual extortion, where we see individuals using usually sexual information or sex-based imagery in exchange for some sort of ransom or to gain more sexual access. We're starting to see a trend that there's an uptick in the victimology of being directed towards men and male identified individuals. And we see the age lowering from those emerging adults to adolescents. So a much younger group of male identified individuals. And again, you've got the overlap of race here. Often those males are males of color who are being targeted by this specific type of sex-based abuse.
It's interesting when we're looking at, there's very little work on people of color when it comes to this phenomenon. Maybe we could start there. Why have we not looked at this, considering there's a whole body of research that knows people of color, particularly Black women, are highly sexualized in media spaces?
Yeah, I think it's there are a couple of factors that are contributing to this. One is that this sort of phenomenon is so new within the canons of research, even those that are looking at sexual violence, gender-based abuse, and other gender-based issues. We were really starting to talk about this in the 2010s from more of a social understanding. And then we're starting to see kind of in 2015, 2017, focused research on digital forms of sex and gender-based abuse, and looking at unpacking then the term revenge porn and its prevalence, its effects, and the characteristics of those who are targeted. So there's not been a lot of time for us to catch up and look at this phenomenon and what we're dealing with. And we know that the advancement of technology often exponentially outpaces how fast we as society can catch up, both in our understanding, within our laws and policies, and currently from academia to support changes that we might need because of the societal impact. So I think most of us as researchers are trying to get our arms around this type of very specific digital-based abuse, and we're looking at it from kind of a mainstream lens. And often when we're approaching research from that more mainstream lens, we start to see pockets of marginalized individuals that are popping up that often have higher risk factors or higher prevalence, higher levels of impact, and are hoping to have the time and the funding to be able to go deeper into looking at those specific groups. Because we know for our marginalized community members, the impact is often so much more powerful within those groups, and they're often under-resourced and under-supported to get the support and help that they need.
What are the factors that you think are unique when you're looking at this type of phenomenon occurring in the Black community, particularly for Black women?
You know, the biggest factor, I believe, is the intersectionality of the Black female experience. That often we are occupying spaces where we have two very prominent parts of ourselves that are front and center. One part being our race, The second part being our gender. And we're unable to decouple those two things in any of the spaces that we occupy. So when we're talking about impacts that are directly related to the Black female experience, we have to have a conversation about the impacts of gendered racism as one of those risk factors and a high contributor to the negative consequences that we see. And gendered racism is a specific form of intersectional oppression that focuses on both an individual's perceived race and their perceived sex or gender characteristics. And I really love the work of Dr. Moya Bailey in this space and really coining the term of misogynoir, which is identifying kind of for the first time the specific way that Black women are discriminated against and often dehumanized because of that overlap of gender and race. And when we start to bring that concept into the digital environment, then you have the term digital misogynoir, which are the ways that Black women are specifically discriminated and dehumanized in online environments, in social media platforms, and in other online spaces. Part of the reason why I think it's important to have a conversation about this experience within our online environments is because of this history in America of Black women being over-sexualized. And that's really coming from some historical stereotypes that we've seen connected to slavery and antebellum times, with those characteristics and tropes of the mammy character, the sapphire angry Black woman character, and the Jezebel, or that promiscuous kind of sexualized character, and how those continue to step forward in our modern society. We just call them different things. Now we have the matriarch. We have the angry Black woman. We have the emergence of the welfare queen, the superwoman that's supposed to balance those out. But still, we have this sexualized character of the thought. And we see kind of that sexualized thought oppression coming out really in our online environments through social media, through the visual media that we consume, and the objectification that's happening through that sexualization of body parts. And we know that female body parts are both reviled and revered. Folks want to have more voluptuous hips and buttocks, want to have large breasts and voluptuous lips. And so we start to see that sexualization of those specific body parts and the decoupling of those sexual body parts from the human person and that personhood that Black women have a right to. And so when we see that separation, we see increases of objectification, of sexualization, and then of oppression of the person who used to occupy or own those parts. That means that Black women are a prime target for image-based abuse and image-based violence within our online environments.
I'm so glad you introduced the concept of misogynoir, because I think it's something that we need to start utilizing and start vocalizing as part of our everyday language, thinking about the image-based violence against Black women. In what ways is it different, really concrete way, from those of white women, for example, or Asian women?
Yeah, some of the ways that we see the experience shifting is with prevalence. So we see women of color, specifically Black women and Native American women, having a higher prevalence of image-based abuse than we see with white women or even with Asian women. So again, there's that overlap and that focus on specific women of color, with Black women having more of that prevalence even than Native American women. It's important for us to kind of spotlight this difference because it's significant. Although the populations that have been studied are small, we see the numbers not matching, so that there are those higher risk and that higher prevalence of victimization. We also see the overlap of racism and this sexualism that we've talked about from this misogynoir concept, that it becomes easy to dismiss the potential harm that image-based abuse may have on Black women. So we see this degradation and kind of this societal pile on of it's not important. And we see Black women not being able to have really allies or solace in any community that would otherwise care. We don't see it from more of our mainstream groups. We also see it kind of dismissed within the Black or African American community. When Black women speak up and talk about harm, they're often silenced or they're dismissed, or the response is one that has both racism and gendered comments that are piled on. And so we see the shrinking of Black victims seeking out resources, of seeing it as something that's inappropriate, or that they have a right to that personhood, that body autonomy, even within the digital environment. Another place that's not helpful is with the emergence of artificial intelligence and AI, and how we have non-consensual AI-generated deepfakes that are, again, using some of these Black sexualized stereotypes to drive the production of sexualized or pornographic material in this space. When we talk about research, we kind of use the shorthand garbage in, garbage out. That if you've got bad information that's coming into your research, you're going to get bad information on the outside. And I kind of apply that to what we see currently with the development of AI. Artificial intelligence is feeding off of the information that is available in our online environments and in the internet. And there are a lot of dark places in the internet where we're getting a lot of garbage information, meaning that it's built on stereotypes. It's built on those ideas of oppression. It's built on some of the worst parts of the human experience. And so we see AI consuming that information. And then when you're asking it to create an image of an individual, you often see it creating images that are founded on those negative stereotypes. So within the Black female experience, we see AI generating imagery that kind of exacerbates those negative, sexualized, and oppressive stereotypes.
What's our options for someone who becomes a victim of this? What are the laws or resources that are available, particularly for Black women, to utilize?
Generally, there are resources that are there that are focused in this space. We've got now 48 states, including DC and Guam, that have non-consensual pornography or revenge porn laws on the books. That means that victims, including Black female victims of non-consensual pornography or image-based abuse, have a legal recourse. They can file police reports. They can use the judicial system to have some accountability for those perpetrators. There are also lots of other resources that are available that focus on this type of digital-based abuse. So we see things like the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative having a hotline. We know that the Domestic Violence Hotline now has an understanding about digital-based abuse and digital forms of dating and domestic violence. We've seen RAINN increase its footprint and hotline services and resources when it comes to digital-based sexual abuse, including recorded sexual assaults, as a way to re-victimize or continue the harm for those particular victims. So it's starting to become more of a normalized resource and something that's accessible to victims in this space. But again, you've got to have an understanding that the Black female experience can make accessing those resources hard because of, again, that overlap of gendered racism and how Black women specifically have not been welcomed in some of those spaces. And I'm thinking about the negative impacts of our judicial system and how Black women may not feel safe or supported reaching out to local law enforcement, may be diminished by district attorneys or other folks who generally have a history of mistreating Black women. I think about the impacts within our medical systems and the reduced health outcomes that have constantly come forward as being more prevalent among Black women than other women of color, specifically when compared to white and Asian women. So whether or not Black women would feel that they could reach out to a medical provider or potentially a mental health provider and have their experience taken seriously is still a concern for folks. We see this being prevalent within social media arenas where folks might have a connection to support groups or other groups across the internet and withdraw from those communities. So often we see victims, regardless of their sex, gender, or racial characteristics, when they're victimized in this space, they often withdraw from the communities around them, from their online communities as well as their offline communities, as a way to protect themselves from re-victimization, because it's so easy for those still images or those video images to resurface. So we see that guilt, shame, and embarrassment being a natural barrier to outreach. And when you add on those historical race-based barriers, you see people of color, women of color, and specifically Black women using more informal ways to seek support. That means that likely they're going to seek support from other Black women, their friend group, their close circles. They may seek support from their faith-based communities, their churches, or other places where they seek spiritual fulfillment. And they may do their own research. So they may become their own supporter and their own advocate and looking for ways that they can support or help themselves.
Well, we have to thank you, Dr. Mikiba Morehead, also because your work is also going to become a source of support and a source of information for Black women. I really appreciate you taking the time to open up discussions around this, particularly among Black women. That was Dr. Mikiba Morehead, an international expert on technology-facilitated sexual abuse, particularly in Black communities. You can find out more about Dr. Morehead by visiting this episode's page on our website. There you can learn more about her research, download her articles, or access her website and social media handles. This podcast is part of the Psychology of Black Womanhood book, Resources, which is used for classroom and community engagement. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to show some love for the podcast, please leave a rating and review. Similarly, if you'd like to keep up with our other projects, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook. To check out all of our activities, just visit our website, www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. Thanks for listening.